Welcome to Jazz Piano Daily 110, and today I'm going to explain to you how tritone substitutions work. We're going to be doing this in two parts, all right? So first of all, we need to understand that a tritone, when we're talking about a tritone, all right, first of all, a tritone is both an interval, but it can also be a substitution, right? And I'm going to explain this more with part one and part two here. But if I'm on C, okay, my tritone is an F sharp, right? It is the halfway or midpoint of the octave, okay? So it's the midpoint within the octave. It is a very tense interval. It is the most tense interval that we have in music. It used to be called the devil's interval. You could be excommunicated from the church if you wrote this interval, right? Ironically enough, it is the interval which is critical for our dominant seventh chords, in which you wouldn't have blues or rock and roll without this interval. And it's kind of funny that it's the devil's chord, right? So anyway, you have your tritone interval right there. All right. So a tritone substitution, which I'll explain more in part two, is rather than think of this as the interval, instead of playing a C chord, you would play a G flat or an F sharp chord, however you want to think of it, right? So rather than playing the C, you'd play the G flat. Today, we're going to focus mostly on the interval. So like I said, first of all, if I just play my C7 chord, what do you notice right away? I have that tritone built right into the chord. If I didn't have the tritone, I would not have a dominant seventh chord. So you can hear I have major seven chords. That sounds nice. Minor sounds nice, but in order to get that bite with the dominant, I need that tritone. All right, let's shift over to the music here, and let's talk about changing the quality of the chords. We talked about this a little bit yesterday, but now let's dive into this a little bit more. So if I have my G7 chord, this is my plain old G7 rootless chord voicing for a dominant seventh chord. So if I put a G down here, this is my seventh, my ninth, my third, and my 13th. And if you go back to Jazz Piano Daily 1, 2, and 3, I talk about how to form all of these rootless chords. All right, so that's G7. Now again, within the G7 chord, you can see that I have my tritone, right? So there's my tritone interval. But then I can also come down here to the root, and I can, instead of playing the G, I can go a tritone away from the G, which again is the midway point in the octave, is D flat, right? Another way of looking at it is flat 5 or sharp 4. A lot of times to find a tritone quickly, I think of the fifth because it's easy to think G and fifth of G is D, or D flat. Now if I play D flat and I change nothing in the right hand, that chord has changed quality. Now, what does it mean, quality? Quality doesn't mean that is it good or bad. Quality means what type of chord is it? How does it sound? What are the characteristics of it? So that's a G7 chord that sounds like a dominant seventh chord. This now is an altered chord. It sounds like an altered chord. And again, just by changing that root right there, I've changed all of the notes of this chord and how they function, right? So again, let me back up for a second. There's G7. So I have these notes, F, A, B, and E, right? Okay. Now when I go to D flat, the notes stay the same, but the function of those notes change. On G7, this is 7, 9, 3, and 13. When I play D flat, this now becomes 3, flat 13, flat 7, sharp 9. Same notes, different quality of chord, different function of those notes. Now I will tell you, like if I'm playing a blues like in C, and I'm ending on the C chord, a lot of times bass players would do stuff like this, which sounds really hip. You'll hear them hit that, like, you know, especially if it's the kind of thing where they could hit that low E on the bass, you know, they'll do something like that, you know, so if they're playing like in a B flat blues, right? right, we've already done the B flat blues with the bass line, right? Now listen to what happens when I get to the end of the blues. I'm going to end on the B flat, right? But then I hit that E down there, and now I'm still playing that same B flat 7 chord there, but by hitting that E, the bass player has changed the quality of the chord. Like I said, bass players love doing this. I hear them do it all the time, and I love the sound of it. You know, they'll hit that E, and now that B flat 7 chord now becomes what? Becomes an E altered chord. All right, let's do a couple of other examples here, and that should help out. So, E flat 7, we've covered this chord already. You should already know that chord. If you go to the tritone of that, here's the 5th. If I go to A, this now becomes what? A altered. 7, sharp 9, 3, flat 13. If I do B flat 7, and I change to an E down there, we've already talked about that. What is it? Now it's an E altered chord. 3, flat 13, flat 7, sharp 9. So by changing that root, not changing anything in the chord, but by changing the root, it changes that whole quality of the chord. Now, something else to understand too is like, remember this works in reverse, right? So let's say I'm thinking of this as like, you know, here, I'll go back to my example right up above, the D flat 7 altered. So let's say I play that D flat 7 altered, right? Well, if I go to the tritone of D flat 7 altered, right? 5, tritone, right? So going to the tritone of D flat, that's G, and I play the G down there, I've turned that altered chord into just a regular old rootless dominant 7th chord. So you can, if you have an altered chord in the music, right, and you're playing an altered chord, and you change the root of that chord, well, now you change it from an altered chord back into a regular dominant 7th chord. So you can go both ways on that. You can go from regular dominant to altered, or from altered back to regular dominant. Really, really cool trick to know. So just give it some time to wash over you, download the music, and then you can go ahead and play along with that. I'll see you in the next lesson. To get the first 45 pages of music for free, just go back to jazzpianodaily.com. If you liked the video, please be sure to click the like button and also subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. To watch the rest of the lessons in this series, just click on the playlist to the right of this arrow. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you in the next video.